At his investor appreciation party, my son Brandon threw the music box into a bucket of ice. He laughed as the champagne chilled around the vintage wood. "Trash belongs with trash," he said, looking me dead in the eye. I did not scream. I did not make a scene. I simply walked out. But I took the wet, broken box to the watchmaker anyway. When the old Italian man saw what was inside, his face went pale. "Sir, do not leave," he whispered, locking the door behind me. "You have no idea what you are holding." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I am Edward Ed Caldwell, 70 years old, and tonight I felt every single one of those years weighing down on my shoulders. The elevator ride up to the penthouse of the Caldwell Tech building felt like an ascension into a world I no longer recognized. This was the company I built with my own hands, starting in a garage with nothing but a soldering iron and a dream. But looking around the ballroom now, I felt like a ghost haunting my own legacy. The room was filled with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of shallow laughter. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting a cold light on the faces of people who had never tightened a screw or written a line of code in their lives. I stood in the corner clutching a package wrapped in brown paper. It was not elegant. It did not have a silk ribbon. It was simple, just like my late wife Lillian would have wanted. A young man in a tailored suit bumped into me, spilling a drop of his martini on my sleeve. "Watch it, old man," he snapped, brushing past me without a second glance. He then turned back and snapped his fingers at me. "Actually, since you are standing there, grab me a napkin, would you?" He thought I was the help. I suppose I looked the part. My suit was 10 years old, the elbows slightly worn. I did not correct him. I just handed him a napkin from the tray nearby and watched him walk away to join a circle of investors who were discussing stock prices like they were betting on racehorses. The double doors swung open, and the room fell silent before erupting into applause. My son Brandon walked in with his wife Vanessa on his arm. They looked like royalty. Brandon was 35, handsome, in a way that money can buy, with perfect teeth and a suit that cost more than my first car. Vanessa was glittering in a silver dress, her eyes scanning the room, not for friends, but for targets. She spotted me in the corner, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she whispered something in Brandon's ear. I saw him sigh. It was a heavy, dramatic sigh that shook his shoulders. He plastered a fake smile on his face and made his way toward me. "Dad," Brandon said, his voice loud enough for the nearby investors to hear, "I did not think you would actually come. You know how late these things go. Past your bedtime, isn't it?" He laughed, and the people around him laughed too, a chorus of obedient sycophants. "I came to wish you a happy birthday, Brandon," I said quietly, "and to celebrate the merger." Vanessa stepped forward, looking at my wrapped package with undisguised disdain. "Oh, Ed, you brought a gift. How quaint." "We told you not to worry about gifts. Brandon has everything he needs. Besides, we are trying to keep the aesthetic of the party modern. Brown paper does not exactly scream billion-dollar merger." "It is from your mother," I said, ignoring her barb. "She wanted you to have it on this specific birthday. She made me promise before she passed." Brandon rolled his eyes. "Mom has been gone for 5 years, Dad. You really need to stop using her memory to guilt-trip me. It is exhausting." He turned away from me, raising his glass to the room. The chatter died down. Brandon loved an audience. He loved the sound of his own voice echoing off the marble walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, spreading his arms wide, "thank you for coming tonight. We are on the verge of history. The merger with Horizon Corp is not just a business deal. It is a testament to vision. Some people get stuck in the past, clinging to old methods and old sentiments. But Caldwell Tech is about the future. We cut the dead weight to let the eagle fly." He gestured toward me. "Speaking of the past, I want to introduce my father, Edward Caldwell, the man who started it all. Give him a round of applause, folks. The applause was polite but brief. Brandon beckoned me onto the stage. Come on up, Dad. Do not be shy. Show us what you brought. I bet it is one of your handmade gadgets. I walked up the stairs, my knees protesting slightly. The spotlight was blinding. I felt exposed. I felt small. I placed the brown package on the glass podium. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from a mixture of nerves and a deep aching sadness. Brandon ripped the paper off with zero care. He expected a watch or maybe a check. When the paper fell away, it revealed a wooden music box. It was made of dark oak hand carved with intricate vines and leaves. On the lid was an inlay of a phoenix rising from ashes made of mother of pearl. It was beautiful in an old-world way, but against the sleek glass and chrome of the penthouse it looked out of place. It looked like an artifact from a forgotten era. A music box, Brandon said, his voice flat. He looked at the audience and shrugged comically. Well, I guess I am 5 years old again. Thanks, Dad. Open it, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Just open it. Brandon popped the latch. He turned the small brass key on the side. He gave it a few aggressive twists. I flinched. The mechanism was delicate. It needed a gentle touch. He let go of the key. We all waited for the melody. For Lillian used to hum it while she worked on her ciphers. It was supposed to be a lullaby. Instead, there was a loud, sickening crack. Then a grinding noise. Krr, crack, krr, krr. Silence. The music box did not play. The gear's boughs were jammed. Someone in the back of the room snickered. Then another. Soon the whole room was chuckling. Brandon's face turned red. Not with embarrassment for me, but with anger at me. He felt humiliated. He felt I had made him look foolish on his big night. He slammed the lid shut. This is exactly what I am talking about. Brandon hissed into the microphone, his voice amplified across the hall. Broken. Outdated. Useless. You bring this trash to my celebration? You stand here in your cheap suit giving me a broken toy in front of my partners? It worked this morning, I said softly. It just needs to be handled with care, Brandon. Care? Brandon laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. You want me to care for garbage? You want me to waste my time fixing things that should have been thrown out years ago? This company is successful because I stopped fixing broken things and started replacing them. He picked up the music box. Vanessa walked up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Honey, do not let him ruin your mood. You know how he gets. Senility is a tragedy. She was playing the victim card, painting me as the confused old man. Brandon looked at the box in his hand, then he looked at the large silver bucket of champagne on the table next to him. The bucket was filled with melting ice and water. You know what Dad, Brandon said, his eyes cold and empty. You are right. This belongs in a special place. He tossed the music box. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the wood spin through the air. The mother-of-pearl phoenix caught the light one last time. Splash! The box landed deep in the ice water. The cold liquid rushed into the delicate gears. The wood instantly began to soak up the moisture. Trash belongs with trash, Brandon declared, wiping his hands on a silk napkin as if he had touched something filthy. The room erupted in laughter. It was not nervous laughter anymore. It was the laughter of the mob. They were laughing because the alpha male had exerted his dominance. They were laughing to show they were on the winning side. My heart stopped. That box was not just wood and gears. It was the last thing Lillian held. She had spent her final months working on it, tinkering with it under her magnifying glass. She told me it was the future. She told me it was our insurance. And now it was drowning in expensive champagne and ice. I did not yell. I did not strike him. I looked at Brandon, and for the first time in my life, I did not see my son. I saw a stranger. I saw a man who had hollowed himself out to fill the space with money. I walked over to the champagne bucket. The guests parted way from me, their laughter dying down into awkward whispers. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg. I reached my hand into the freezing water. The ice cubes bit into my skin. My fingers wrapped around the soggy wood of the box. I pulled it out. Water dripped from it onto the polished marble floor, creating a small puddle. I took out a handkerchief from my pocket and dried the box as best as I could. I treated it with the dignity it deserved. "You are leaving, Vanessa?" asked her voice dripping with fake concern. "But we haven't cut the cake yet." I looked at her, then I looked at Brandon. "Enjoy your cake," I said. My voice was low, but it carried through the silence of the room. "Enjoy your merger. Enjoy this view, Brandon. Take a good look at it. Because you can throw away the past, but you cannot outrun the consequences." "What are you going to do, sue me for a broken toy?" Brandon scoffed, pouring himself another drink. "Go home, Dad. Go to sleep. I will call the nursing home in the morning. I think it is time." I did not respond. I turned my back on them. I walked through the crowd of millionaires holding my dripping wet box against my chest. I walked past the security guards who refused to make eye contact. I walked out of the penthouse and into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off the sound of the party, I finally let out a breath. I was shaking. My hand was numb from the ice water, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I did not go home. I walked out into the biting Chicago wind. Snow was falling, covering the dirty streets in a blanket of white. I hailed a cab. The driver looked at my wet coat and the wooden box. "Where to, pal?" he asked. "The old district," I said. "West 4th Street, Russo's watch repair." "It is midnight," the driver said, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "Nothing is open down there." "Just drive," I said. The city blurred past me. The lights of the skyscrapers looked like distant stars, cold and unreachable. I looked down at the box. The wood was warped. The varnish was clouding from the water. Had he destroyed it? Had Brandon's arrogance finally erased the last trace of his mother's genius? We pulled up to a small shop squeezed between a laundromat and a boarded-up bakery. The sign above the door said Russo's timepieces in peeling gold letters. The shop was dark. The grate was pulled down. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk. I banged on the metal grate. "Russo!" I shouted. "It is Ed Caldwell! Open up!" No answer. The wind howled down the alleyway, cutting through my damp clothes. "Russo, please! It is an emergency!" I heard the sound of bolts sliding. The small door within the grate opened. A short man with wild white hair and thick glasses peered out. He was wearing pajamas and a heavy wool cardigan. "Ed?" He squinted at me. "Are you crazy?" "It is freezing. You look like you fell in a lake." "I need your help," I said, pushing past him into the shop. "It is the box. The Phoenix box." Russo froze. He looked at the bundle in my hands. He quickly locked the door and flipped the sign to closed, even though it already was. He led me to the back room where a single lamp illuminated a workbench covered in tiny gears and springs. "Put it down," he said, his voice serious. "Gently." I placed the box on the velvet mat. Russo grabbed a towel and began dabbing the wood with the precision of a surgeon. He put on his magnifying loupe. "What happened?" he asked, examining the hinges. "My son threw it in an ice bucket," I said. Russo stopped. He looked up at me over the rim of his glasses. "He threw it? He called it trash." Russo muttered something in Italian that sounded like a curse. He carefully pried the lid open. The mechanism was soaked. He took a pair of tweezers and touched the main cylinder. "It is jammed," he said. "The water has caused the wood to swell, pressing against the release lever. But what?" Russo turned the box over. He shined a bright light on the bottom panel. He scraped away a bit of the wet varnish, revealing a tiny metallic seam that was invisible to the naked eye. He looked at me and his hands were shaking. "Ed, this is not just a music box. I told Lillian this design was dangerous. I told her that if anyone found out what was inside..." He did not finish the sentence. He reached for a specialized screwdriver, a tool so small it looked like a needle. "If the water got into the core, it is over," Russo said, sweat forming on his brow, despite the cold. He began to unscrew the bottom plate. 1 screw, 2 screws. I held my breath. The plate came off with a soft hiss. Russo leaned in. He gasped. He stumbled back, knocking over a jar of screws. "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward. "Is it broken?" Russo looked at me, his face pale as a sheet. "No, Ed," he whispered. "It is not broken. And it is not just a music box." He pointed to the center of the mechanism. There, nestled inside a waterproof titanium casing, was not a musical drum. It was a microchip connected to a reel of microfilm, and blinking softly, with a faint red rhythm, was a light. "It is active," Russo said, his voice trembling. The water triggered the failsafe. "Ed, do you know what date it is?" "It is October 14th, I said. Russo looked at the calendar on his wall. "The lease expires tomorrow at midnight," he said. Lillian set the timer. "If this box is not used to renew the protocol within 24 hours. "What happens?" I asked. Russo looked me in the eye. "Everything Brandon thinks he owns. Every patent, every server, every line of code. It all reverts to the holder of this key." He pointed at me. "You, Ed. You are holding the kill switch to a billion-dollar empire, and your son just tried to drown it." The wind on West 4th Street cut through my soaked coat like 1,000 razor blades. I stood in the shadow of the flickering streetlight, clutching the box against my chest, trying to shield it from the snow that had begun to fall in earnest. The street was silent, except for the distant wail of a siren, a sound that seemed to follow me wherever I went tonight. I raised my fist and pounded on the metal security grate of the shop. The sound was harsh and metallic, echoing down the empty alleyway. "Russo, open up. I know you are in there." There was no movement inside. The sign in the window said, "Closed" in peeling gold letters, and the display case full of antique pocket watches was dark. I pounded again, harder this time, my knuckles scraping against the cold steel. "Antonio, it is Ed Caldwell. Please." Finally, a light flickered on in the back room. A shadow moved toward the front, slowly and grumpily. The inner door opened, and Antonio Russo peered out through the thick glass of the shop window. He was wearing a thick wool robe over his flannel pajamas, and his wild white hair was sticking up in every direction. He looked like a mad scientist who had been disturbed from a deep slumber. He squinted at me, adjusting his thick spectacles. "Go home, Ed," he grumbled, his voice muffled by the glass. "It is past midnight. I am not opening for the Pope himself, let alone for you. Come back tomorrow." "I cannot wait until tomorrow," I shouted through the glass. "It is an emergency, Antonio. It is the music box. The one Lillian commissioned." Russo paused. He looked at the bundle in my arms, wrapped in my ruined jacket. He saw the water dripping from it, pooling on the concrete sidewalk. His expression changed from annoyance to confusion, and then to concern. He fumbled with the keys, his hands moving faster now. The locks clicked open one by one, and he rolled the heavy grate up just enough for me to duck under. "Get in," he said, pulling me inside and quickly locking the door behind me. "You are shivering like a wet dog. What in God's name are you doing walking around Chicago at this hour with a masterpiece in your arms?" The shop smelled of oil, old wood, and pipe tobacco. It was a comforting smell, a smell of patience and precision. It was the opposite of the penthouse I had just left. Russo led me to his workbench in the back. He swept aside a pile of gears and laid down a velvet cloth. "Put it here," he commanded. I unwrapped the box. When Russo saw it, he gasped. The beautiful dark oak was sodden. The varnish had turned a milky white in places, where the champagne and water had reacted with the finish. But worst of all was the silence. The box, which should have been humming with potential energy, was dead weight. "Mother of God," Russo whispered. He did not look at me. He only had eyes for the machine. He touched the wood gently, as if checking for a pulse. "Who did this, Ed? Who treats a work of art like this?" "My son," I said, my voice flat. "He said it was trash. He threw it in an ice bucket to prove a point to his investors." Russo stopped. He looked up at me, and his eyes behind the thick lenses were blazing with a cold fury. "He drowned it. He took the last thing your wife built, and he drowned it like an unwanted kitten." He grabbed a specialized cloth and began frantically drying the exterior. He moved with a speed that belied his age. He took a small air blower and began clearing the water from the hinges. He was muttering curses in Italian, low and rhythmic. "We have to open it," he said, reaching for his tools. "If the water gets into the main cylinder, the pins will rust. If the pins rust, the melody is gone forever." He adjusted the halogen lamp, pulling it down until the bright white light flooded the workbench. He put on his magnifying loupe. I watched him work, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I had just lost my son, but right now all that mattered was this box. Russo turned the box over to access the base plate. He picked up a fine, tipped probe and began to scrape away the gunk that had accumulated around the screws. He paused. He leaned in closer. He scraped again. "Ed," he said, his voice suddenly very quiet. "Come look at this." I leaned over his shoulder. Under the magnifying light, I saw what he was pointing at. On the bottom of the brass base plate, hidden beneath a layer of decorative filigree, was a symbol. It was so small, I would have missed it with the naked eye. It was a bird. A phoenix rising from a flame. I frowned. Lillian liked mythology. "It is just a decoration." "No," Ed, Russo said, standing up straight. He took off his loupe and looked at me with a seriousness that sent a chill down my spine. "This is not a decoration. This is a maker's mark. But it is not from any watchmaker guild I know." He walked over to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He rummaged through a stack of dusty manuals and pulled out a faded black book. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for. He slammed the book down on the table. "Look," he said, pointing to a diagram. It was the same symbol. "The phoenix, this is a government contractor seal from the late 80s, Russo said. Specifically, it belongs to a division that handled cryptographic hardware for naval intelligence." I stared at him. "That is impossible. Lillian was a math teacher. She taught algebra at the community college. She liked crossword puzzles and knitting." Russo shook his head slowly. He looked at the box with a newfound fear and respect. "Algebra teachers do not know how to build a triaxial locking mechanism, Ed. I saw the schematics she brought me when she asked for my help with the outer casing. I thought she was just a brilliant hobbyist. But this symbol changes everything. This is not just a music box. This is a container." He looked me dead in the eye. "Ed, did your wife ever talk about her work before she met you?" "She said she worked in administration," I stammered. "For a logistics company." "Logistics?" Russo scoffed. He turned back to the box. He picked up his screwdriver, but his hand hesitated. "Ed, whatever is inside this box was never meant to be seen by anyone but you, and your son just tried to destroy it. If this mechanism is what I think it is, the water might have triggered a tamper protocol." "Open it," I said. "Ed, if I open this, and I am wrong, we could break it forever." "Open it," I repeated. "If Lillian built it, she built it to survive. She knew what kind of man my son was becoming even back then. She knew I would need this. Russo nodded. He took a deep breath and inserted the screwdriver into the first screw. The room was silent save for the ticking of 100 clocks on the walls. Each tick felt like a countdown. One screw came loose, then the second, then the third. Russo lifted the heavy brass plate. We both leaned in. There was no rust. There was no water damage inside the core. The inner chamber was sealed with a rubber gasket that had held tight against the champagne. But it was what was inside the chamber that made my knees weak. It was not a music cylinder. It was a complex array of titanium gears connected to a small black unit that pulsed with a faint red light. "It is alive," Russo whispered. "The water didn't kill it. The cold activated it." He pointed to a small engraving on the inner titanium shell. It read, "Property of L. Caldwell. Lease agreement 1994. Russo looked at me and his face was pale. "Ed, this is a timer. And looking at the rate of that light, I would say you do not have much time left. Whatever this controls, whatever this locks or unlocks, it is about to expire. This is the part where the magic happens. Or perhaps magic is the wrong word. This was engineering. Cold, hard, beautiful engineering. Russo did not just open the box. He prepared for surgery. He cleared the rest of the workbench, sweeping away the debris of lesser watches. He laid down a sheet of anti-static rubber. He put on a pair of white cotton gloves. "Do not breathe too heavily, Ed," he said. "The tolerances on a mechanism like this are measured in microns. One stray particle of dust could jam the release." I took a step back, pressing myself against the filing cabinets. The shop was dead silent. The wind outside had died down, leaving only the hum of the electric heater and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Russo adjusted the dual oculars of his microscope. He reached for a set of beryllium screwdrivers, the kind that are non-magnetic. He did not look like a shopkeeper anymore. He looked like a bomb disposal expert. He started with the comb. That is the part of a music box with the metal teeth that pluck the pins to make sound. Usually it is held by two simple screws. Russo removed them, but the comb did not come loose. "Clever," he muttered. "Very clever, Lillian." "What is it?" I asked, my voice whispering in the quiet room. "False screw heads," he said. "They are decoys. If a thief tried to force these, the whole thing would lock up permanently. The real release is magnetic." He took a small, rare earth magnet from his drawer. He ran it along the side of the wooden case in a specific pattern. Left, right, down, click. A sound so faint I almost missed it. The comb popped up. Beneath it was not the simple brass bedplate of a standard movement. It was a labyrinth. Layers of gears interlocked in a way that defied standard geometry. It looked less like a musical instrument and more like the inside of a bank vault. Russo began the disassembly. He worked with a rhythm. Unscrew. Lift. Place on the mat. Unscrew. Lift. Place on the mat. He removed the governor fan, the part that regulates the speed of the music. He removed the spring housing. "This is not a single barrel movement," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It is a planetary gear system. Look at this, Ed." I leaned in. The gears were not just spinning. They were orbiting a central shaft. "This creates a kinetic charge," he explained. "Winding the key does not just store energy for the music. It powers a generator. A micro-generator." He used a pair of fine-tipped tweezers to reach into the heart of the machine. He was aiming for the main cylinder, the part that usually has the pins that play the song. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. He lifted the cylinder out. It was heavy, much heavier than brass should be, and as the light from the halogen lamp hit it, I realized it was not brass at all. The outer coating was gold paint, but it had been scratched during the extraction. Underneath the metal was a dull, dark gray. "Titanium," Russo breathed. "Grade 5 aerospace titanium. You could run this over with a tank, and it would not crush." He held the cylinder up to the light. It was seamless. There were no screws, no latches. It looked like a solid rod of metal. "How do we open it?" I asked. "We do not," Russo said, setting it down gently. "The music box opens it. The box is the reader. The cylinder is the data." He pointed to the empty space where the cylinder had been sitting. At the bottom of the cavity were 3 gold contact points. When the music plays, he explained, his hands moving in the air to simulate the motion the cylinder spins. The friction generates a small electrical current. That current travels through these contacts into the cylinder. If the melody is played at the exact right tempo, it unlocks the data inside. I finished, realizing the brilliance of it. Exactly. It is a physical, cryptographic key. Russo picked up the titanium tube again. He looked at the end of it. There was a tiny lens no bigger than the head of a pin. He placed the cylinder under the high-power microscope. He gestured for me to look. I peered through the eyepieces. At first, I saw nothing but gray blur. Then Russo adjusted the focus. The gray resolved into lines. Thousands of lines. It was a reel of microfilm tightly wound inside the titanium shell. But it was not just pictures of documents. Embedded in the center of the reel was a silicon wafer, a computer chip. "Do you see the serial number on the chip?" Russo asked. I squinted. Etched into the silicon were letters. LC94 Alpha. Lillian Caldwell, 1994 Alpha, Russo translated. "Ed, this is what is known in the industry as a hardware security module, or HSM." He stepped back and took off his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. In the 90s, before cloud storage and blockchain, people who wanted to secure assets used physical tokens. But this is a masterpiece. Your wife did not just buy this. She engineered it. He walked over to his computer, a messy setup in the corner with 3 monitors. He began typing furiously. "The chip contains the private encryption keys," he said. "Think of your company like a house. The servers, the patents, the bank accounts, they are all rooms in the house. Your son thinks he owns the house because he has the deed. But the house has a master lock, a digital deadlock that overrides everything else. And this is the key," I said, looking at the disassembled pieces on the velvet mat. Russo nodded. "But it is more than a key. It is a dead man's switch." "What does that mean?" Russo turned one of his monitors toward me. It showed a countdown timer. "The chip has an internal clock powered by a lithium isotope battery that lasts 30 years. It was activated on October 15, 1994. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "If the key is not inserted into a terminal and validated by midnight tomorrow, the chip executes a command called Zero Eyes." "Zero Eyes." "It wipes itself," Russo said. "It erases the encryption keys. And without those keys, the blind trust that holds the intellectual property rights to your company's core technology will lock down. The data becomes scramble. It becomes unreadable garbage. The company assets become frozen. The stock value goes to zero because the product effectively ceases to exist." He looked at me with a grave expression. "Lillian set this up so that you would have to choose to renew it. She wanted to make sure that 30 years later the company was still in hands she trusted. She knew," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "She knew Brandon might lose his way. She gave me the power to pull the plug." Russo picked up the tweezers again. "We have to reassemble it, Ed. We have to put every gear back exactly as it was. If the timing is off by even a fraction of a second, the cylinder won't spin at the right speed to generate the voltage. The chip won't activate, and the deadline will pass." He looked at the pile of parts. "This is going to take all night. And your son damaged the governor fan when he threw it. I have to machine a new part by hand." "Can you do it?" I asked. Russo looked at the titanium cylinder, then at the photo of Lillian I had pulled from my wallet and placed on the table. "For her," he said softly, "I can do anything. But Ed, once we fix this, you have a choice to make. You can take this box to the board meeting, plug it in, and renew the lease. You can save your son's empire. Or I can let it burn, I said. Russo did not answer. He just picked up his file and a piece of raw brass. The sound of metal rasping against metal filled the room. It was the sound of a weapon being forged. I sat on the stool watching him work. I thought about the ice bucket. I thought about Brandon's laugh. I thought about the way the investors looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. Trash belongs with trash, my son had said. He was right. He just didn't realize that in this equation he was the trash, and I was the incinerator. Work faster. Antonio, I said. We have an appointment to keep. Russo pointed to the rotary phone on the wall. It was a black Bakelite relic from the 50s, the kind that weighed as much as a brick. It was the only phone in the shop. He did not trust cell phones. He said they listened. Call him Russo, said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. If we are going to do this, we need the legal shark. We need Leo. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:14 in the morning. Leonard Katz was 72 years old. He had retired 5 years ago, moving to a cabin in the Adirondacks to fish and forget about the sharks of Wall Street. He valued his sleep more than his portfolio. He's going to kill me, I said, picking up the heavy receiver. He will thank you, Russo muttered. Once he hears the serial number on that chip, he will thank you. I dialed the number. I still knew it by heart. The rotary dial clicked and whirred, with each number a slow, agonizing sound that seemed to echo in the silent shop. The line rang, and rang, and rang. On the 7th ring, a voice answered. It was gravelly thick with sleep and irritation. If this is not the police telling me my boat is on fire, hang up now. Leo, it is Ed. Silence. Then the sound of rustling sheets and a lamp clicking on. Ed, it is 3 in the morning. Did you get arrested? Did Brandon finally push you down the stairs? Not yet, I said. But he tried to drown Lillian. What are you talking about? Leo asked, his voice sharpening instantly. The sleep vanished. This was the voice of the man who had defended my company against 3 hostile takeovers in the 90s. I am at Russo's watch shop, I said. I have the music box. The one Lillian gave me before she died. The one Brandon threw in an ice bucket tonight. Leo let out a low whistle. That little prick. I always knew he had no class. Is the box ruined? Russo leaned in toward the receiver. Tell him the serial number, Russo whispered. Leo, listen to me, I said. Russo opened the box. It is not just a music box. It is a container. We found a titanium cylinder inside. There is a chip. I paused, taking a breath. The serial number is LC94 Alpha. The line went dead silent. For a moment, I thought he had hung up. I could hear the faint static of the connection. Then I heard the sound of a chair scraping against a wooden floor, and the sound of a safe being opened. Say that again, Leo commanded. LC94 Alpha. I heard papers shuffling, fast, frantic. Holy Mother of God, Leo whispered. I thought that was a myth. I thought Lillian was joking when she added the Omega clause to the trust fund. It is real, Leo, I said. It is sitting on a velvet mat in front of me, and it is blinking red. Put me on speaker, Leo said. Now. I fumbled with the old phone, but it did not have a speaker button. Russo grabbed a second earpiece from under the counter, a technician's listening tool, and spliced it into the wire. We both huddled around the phone. Leo, we are listening, I said. Ed. Do you remember the restructuring of '94? Leo asked. The year we almost went bankrupt because the government tried to seize the encryption algorithms? I remember, I said. We survived because Lillian came up with a new code overnight. She did not just come up with a code, Leo said. She created a separate legal entity. I am looking at the original deed right now. It is yellow with age, but the ink is clear. Lillian registered the core technology, the very heart of Caldwell Tech, under a private holding company called the Phoenix Trust. I never heard of it, I said. That was the point, Leo said. It is a blind trust. Caldwell Tech does not own the software, Ed. The company leases it. It is a 30-year lease. And the lessor is the Phoenix Trust. And who controls the trust, I asked. The bearer of the physical key, Leo said. The lease agreement states that every 30 years the key must be inserted into the mainframe to authenticate the license. If the authentication fails or if the time expires, the license is revoked immediately. What does revoked mean exactly? I asked. Looking at the disassembled gears. It means the code goes dark, Leo said. It means the software that runs every server, every database, and every product Brandon is selling right now stops working. It reverts to raw binary. It is a kill switch, Ed. Lillian built a kill switch into the foundation of the empire. Russo cleared his throat. Mr. Katz, this is Antonio Russo. The chip has a tamper protocol. It was exposed to water. The failsafe has been triggered. How much time do we have? Leo asked. Midnight tomorrow, Russo said. If we do not plug this unit into the main server at the company headquarters, by then the chip will execute a zero-eyes command. It will fry itself and the encryption keys. And if that happens, Leo asked. Then the company is dead, Russo said. The intellectual property becomes vapor. Leo laughed. It was a dry, dark laugh. So let me get this straight. Brandon is about to sign a merger deal worth $500 million. He is selling the company, but he is selling a house that he doesn't own the land for, and the lease on the land expires tomorrow night. Exactly, I said. Ed, Leo said, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. Do you realize what this means? You are not just holding a music box. You are holding the deed. If you walk into that boardroom tomorrow and let that timer run out, Brandon goes to prison for fraud. He is selling assets he cannot guarantee. But if you renew the lease, you save him. I looked at the box. I looked at the tiny red light pulsing like a heartbeat. He threw it in the trash, Leo. He called his mother's legacy garbage. Then let's teach him the difference between value and price, Leo said. I am getting in my car. I can be in Chicago by noon. Do not do anything until I get there. And Ed? Yeah, Leo. Do not sign anything. Brandon will try to get you to sign a waiver. He probably needs your signature as the founder to finalize the sale. He thinks it is a formality. Do not sign it. I won't, I said. And keep that box safe, Leo added. If Brandon finds out what is inside, he will not just throw it in water next time. He will burn it. That box is the only thing standing between him and a federal indictment. I hung up the phone. The silence returned to the shop, but it felt different now. It was not the silence of the night. It was the silence before a storm. Russo looked at me. He picked up the brass file again. Your friend is right, he said. We have work to do. He picked up the damaged governor fan. The metal was bent, twisted by the impact of the ice cubes. Lillian used a specific alloy, Russo muttered more to himself than to me. I need to melt down some old gears to match the density. If the weight is off by a gram, the music plays too fast and the voltage spikes. If it is too slow, the voltage drops and the chip stays dormant. He walked over to a small crucible in the corner of the room. He lit a torch. The blue flame hissed. Ed, he said over the roar of the flame, you need to sleep. You have a battle tomorrow. I cannot sleep, I said, dragging a stool over to the workbench. I will watch. I will learn. Russo nodded. He dropped a handful of brass cogs into the crucible. I watched them melt. They turned from solid, defined shapes into a glowing liquid pool. It reminded me of my life. Everything I thought was solid, my family, my company, my relationship with my son, had melted down tonight. But out of the molten mess, Russo was going to cast something new, something stronger. "Tell me about the song," I said. "Why did she choose that lullaby?" Russo poured the liquid metal into a mold. "Because it was the only thing that could calm Brandon down when he was a baby," he said. "Lillian told me. She said he was a colicky child, always crying, always wanting more. But when she hummed that song, he would go quiet. She hoped that maybe one day, if he lost his way, the music would bring him back." I felt a tear run down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly. "The music won't bring him back," I said, "but it will wake him up." Russo began to file the cooling metal. The sound was rhythmic. Scritch, scritch, scritch. We sat there for hours. Two old men in a freezing shop guarding a billion-dollar secret, while the city outside slept unaware that the world was about to change. At around 5 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brandon. "Meeting at 9 a.m. Bring your ID. And don't wear that embarrassed suit. I'll have my assistant send a car." I looked at the text. No apology. No mention of the box. Just orders. I typed a reply. "I will be there." I put the phone down. I watched the red light on the chip blinking. One blink, two blinks. Tick-tock, Brandon. Tick-tock. The sun came up over Chicago like a bruised eye. It was gray and unforgiving, casting long shadows across my living room floor. I had not slept. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand, and my hands were stained with the oil and brass filings from Russo's workshop. I sat in my leather armchair, the one Lillian used to read in, and stared at the phone on the side table. I knew it would ring. Brandon was predictable in his impatience. He operated on a schedule that did not allow for pauses or reflection. To him, silence was just wasted capital. At 8:15 exactly, the phone screamed. It was not a request. It was a summons. I picked up the receiver. I did not say hello. I just listened to the heavy breathing on the other end, the sound of a man who was already angry before the day had even begun. "Dad." "Pick up. I know you are screening my calls." "I am here, Brandon," I said. My voice came out raspy, which was good. It sounded weak. It sounded beaten. "You need to get down here," Brandon snapped. "No pleasantries. No asking how I was after walking out into a snowstorm the night before." His voice was tight-clipped and professional. The voice he used when he was firing someone. "We have a situation with the legal team," he continued. "Apparently, the buyers are being meticulous. They want a wet signature on the founder's waiver. They want to make sure you are not going to pop up in 6 months claiming you own the patents." "I own the patents," I thought to myself. "I own the very air you are breathing in that office." But out loud, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch. I let him fill it with his own anxiety. "Look, Dad." Brandon sighed, and the sound was filled with exaggerated exhaustion. "I know you are upset about last night. Maybe I was a little harsh. But you have to understand the pressure I am under. These investors expect perfection, and walking in there with a water-damaged toy, it did not look good. It made us look amateur. It was a gift," I whispered into the phone. "It was a distraction," Brandon corrected me sharply. "And we cannot afford distractions. Not today. Today is payday. Today we secure the legacy." Legacy. He used that word so easily. To him, legacy was a number in a bank account. To me, legacy was the grease under my fingernails and the code Lillian wrote by candlelight. "The car is outside," Brandon said. "My driver is waiting. Do not make him wait long. And Dad, please wear the navy suit, the one Vanessa bought you. The gray one makes you look indigent." I looked down at my clothes. I was still wearing the trousers from last night, dried and wrinkled. "I am tired, Brandon," I said, adding a tremor to my voice. "I do not know if I can handle a meeting today. My head is foggy." There was a pause on the other line. A cold, calculated pause. When Brandon spoke again, his voice had changed. It was lower, softer, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the tone one uses with a child or a mental patient. "Foggy," he repeated. "You know, Dad, Vanessa and I were talking last night after you left. We are really worried about you. Living alone in that big empty house, it is not safe. You are forgetting things. You are acting out in public." I gripped the phone cord tight. "Here it comes, the threat." "Maybe it is time we revisited the conversation about Sunset Hills," Brandon said. Sunset Hills. It sounded like a resort. It was actually a high-end storage facility for the inconvenient elderly, a place where they medicated you into silence and parked you in front of a television until you expired. "I have a brochure right here on my desk," Brandon continued. "They have a memory care unit, 24-hour supervision. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or maintenance or embarrassing yourself at parties." He let the words hang there. It was blackmail, pure and simple. "Sign the papers or I will declare you incompetent and lock you away." I closed my eyes. I imagined the titanium cylinder spinning inside the music box. I imagined the red light blinking. "No," I said, making my voice sound small and frightened. "No, Brandon. Please. I do not want to go there. I want to stay in my house." "Then help me help you," Brandon said. His voice was triumphant now. He had won. He had found the pressure point. "Come to the office, sign the waiver, show everyone that you are lucid and supportive. If this deal goes through smoothly, well, we can forget all about Sunset Hills for a while. You can keep your house. You can keep your little garden." He was offering me my own life as a bargaining chip. "Okay," I said. "Okay, Brandon. I will come." "Good choice, Dad. See? We can work together. Just get in the car and bring your ID. The notaries are strict." He hung up without saying goodbye. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a monotonous drone that sounded like a flatline. I put the phone down slowly. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was shaking from adrenaline. He thought I was weak. He thought I was a senile old man clinging to his furniture and his memories. He thought he could bully me with the threat of a nursing home because he believed I had no other cards to play. He had no idea that I was not just bringing my ID to the meeting. I was bringing the executioner's axe. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. I looked at my reflection. The bags under my eyes were deep, and my skin was pale. I looked every bit the 70-year-old victim he wanted to see. "Good," I whispered to the glass. "Let him see the ruin. He won't see the bomb until it explodes." I went to the bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside the navy suit Vanessa had bought me. It was too modern, too slim cut. It felt like a costume. Instead, I reached for my old charcoal suit, the one I wore to Lillian's funeral. It was a bit loose now, and the style was 20 years out of date. It was the suit of a man who had stopped trying. Perfect. I dressed slowly, buttoning the shirt with deliberate care. I tied my tie a simple knot, not the Windsor knot Brandon preferred. I wanted to look diminished. I wanted to look like I was shrinking. I walked back to the living room. The music box was sitting on the dining table wrapped in a fresh velvet cloth Rousseau had given me. It looked innocent. It looked like a box of cigars or a stack of letters. It did not look like the end of the world. I picked it up. It was heavy. The weight of it was grounding. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cold air hit me instantly sharp and cleansing. The black sedan was waiting at the curb, the engine idling, pumping white exhaust into the frozen morning air. The driver, a man I did not recognize, got out and opened the rear door for me. He did not smile. He checked his watch. Mr. Caldwell, he said, we are on a tight schedule. I know, I said, clutching the velvet bundle to my chest. I would not want to be late for my own funeral. I slid into the leather seat. The car smelled of new car scent and aggressive air freshener. It smelled sterile. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at my house. My modest brick house with the oak tree in the front yard. Brandon saw it as an asset to be liquidated or a leverage point to be used. I saw it as the last fortress. We drove in silence toward the city skyline. The glass towers rose up like needles piercing the gray sky. Somewhere in one of those towers, Brandon was pacing, sipping his espresso, checking his stock options. He was feeling powerful. He was feeling invincible. Enjoy it, son, I thought as the city loomed closer. Enjoy this last hour of being the king, because the old jester is coming, and he is bringing the truth with him. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. You okay back there, sir? He asked. You look a little pale. I am fine, I said, looking out the window at the passing blur of traffic. I am just rehearsing. Rehearsing for what? For the performance of a lifetime. We turned onto the avenue leading to Caldwell Tech. The building was massive, a monolith of steel and glass that reflected the clouds. My name was on the side of it in letters 20 feet high. Caldwell. But it didn't feel like my name anymore. It felt like a brand, a logo, a hollow shell. Brandon was waiting for me in the lobby. He wasn't alone. He had Vanessa with him and 2 lawyers in expensive suits who looked like sharks sensing blood in the water. They watched me walk through the revolving doors. I hunched my shoulders slightly. I shuffled my feet. I held the velvet package tight like a security blanket. Brandon checked his watch as I approached. You are 5 minutes late, he said. I am sorry, I mumbled, avoiding his eyes. The traffic. He sighed and adjusted his cufflinks. Whatever. You are here. That is what matters. Let's get this over with. He turned and walked toward the elevators, not waiting for me. He assumed I would follow. He assumed I would always follow. I fell into step behind him, the good soldier, the obedient father. Vanessa fell back to walk beside me. Her perfume was overpowering. Is that the box? She asked, pointing to the bundle in my arms. Why did you bring that wet thing here, Ed? It smells like mildew. I didn't want to leave it alone, I stammered. She rolled her eyes. Jesus, Ed. You are obsessed. Just keep it hidden, okay? We don't want the investors thinking you are carrying around trash. I nodded. Don't worry, Vanessa, I said softly as we stepped into the elevator. I promise you. By the time I leave this building, everyone will know exactly what this is. The doors closed, sealing us in. The numbers above the door began to climb. Going up. Straight to the top. Straight to the edge of the cliff. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded like a judgment bell. I stepped out onto the 42nd floor, the executive level of Caldwell Tech. The air up here was different. It was thinner, recycled, and scrubbed clean of any human scent. It smelled of ozone and aggressive ambition. Vanessa walked ahead of me, her high heels clicking a sharp staccato rhythm on the polished marble floors. Click, clack, click, clack. It was the sound of a countdown. Brandon walked beside her, talking loudly on his headset, ignoring the fact that I was struggling to keep up with my shuffling gait. He was already celebrating. I could hear snippets of his conversation. Yes, the champagne is on ice. Yes, the jet is fueled. We are going to Saint-Tropez as soon as the ink is dry. I clutched the velvet-wrapped bundle to my chest and followed them down the long glass corridor. This hallway used to be lined with photos of our first employees, the engineers and dreamers who built this place. Now those photos were gone, replaced by abstract art that looked like violent splashes of red and black paint. It was fitting, I suppose. The soul had been painted over. As we passed the open-plan workspace, heads began to turn. These were not the people I hired. These were young, hungry faces bathed in the blue glow of monitors. But there were a few familiar ones. I saw Sarah, the head of accounting, who had been with me for 20 years. She was holding a stack of files, and when she saw me, her hands stopped moving. She looked at my old suit. She looked at the way I hunched my shoulders. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just looked down at her shoes, as if ashamed to witness my humiliation. I could see the whispers spreading like wildfire across the room. There he is. The old man. He looks lost. It is sad, really. He used to be a giant. They pitied me. They thought I was being led to the slaughter. They had no idea I was the one holding the knife. Brandon kicked open the double doors to the boardroom. It was a massive space dominated by a table made of black obsidian that looked like a slab of ice. Around the table sat the sharks. 5 lawyers from the acquisition firm and 3 bankers from the investment group. They were all younger than me, all sharper, and all waiting for the carcass to be served. "Ah!" "The man of the hour," one of the bankers said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He didn't offer me his hand. He just gestured to the empty chair at the far end of the table. The seat furthest from power. "Sit down, Dad," Brandon said, pulling out his own chair at the head of the table. "And please try not to touch anything with those oily hands. This table costs more than your car." I sat. The leather chair swallowed me. I placed the velvet bundle on the table in front of me. Vanessa sat next to Brandon, placing a hand on his arm. She looked at the bundle with disgust. "Does he have to keep that dirty thing on the table?" she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It is unsanitary." "It is fine," Brandon said, waving his hand dismissively. "Let him have his security blanket. We just need his signature." He signaled to the lead lawyer, a man with a face like a hatchet. The lawyer slid a stack of documents across the black table. They slid smoothly, stopping exactly in front of me. It was a thick pile, hundreds of pages of legal jargon meant to confuse and intimidate. "Mr. Caldwell," the lawyer said, his voice devoid of emotion, "we need you to execute the founder's consent. As the original holder of the corporate charter, your signature is required to authorize the transfer of control to the Horizon Group." He flipped the document to the last page. A yellow sticky note with an arrow pointed to a line. "Sign here." I looked at the paper. The letters danced before my eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses, the ones with the taped bridge. I put them on slowly, deliberately. Brandon sighed loudly. He drummed his fingers on the table. "Jesus, Dad. It is a standard waiver. You do not need to read the fine print. We have been over this. You get your payout, you keep the house, and you go quietly into the night. Just sign the damn thing so we can pop the corks." I looked up at him over the rim of my glasses. "I just want to be sure, Brandon," I said, my voice trembling. "I want to be sure everything is correct." "It is correct," the banker snapped. "We have audits on top of audits. The only thing holding up this $500 million deal is your pen." I looked down at the document again. It was the waiver of claims. But underneath that in the stack was another document. The lawyer had been sloppy, or perhaps just arrogant. He had grouped the founder's consent with the IP status confirmation. The IP status confirmation was a single sheet. It had 2 checkboxes near the bottom. Box A. I confirm that all intellectual property leases are active and renewable. Box B. I confirm that the intellectual property lease has been terminated and rights have reverted to the grantor. The lawyer had pre-checked Box A with a pencil. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen. Brandon was not looking at me. He was looking at his phone, texting someone. Probably his dealer or his mistress. Vanessa was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. The lawyers were packing up their briefcases, assuming the deal was done. I took a breath. My hand stopped shaking. I pressed the pen to the paper. But I did not sign the waiver first. I slid the IP confirmation sheet out slightly. I used the tip of the pen to erase the pencil mark in box A. It smeared slightly, leaving a gray smudge. Then, with a firm, decisive stroke, I checked box B, terminated. Then I signed my name at the bottom. Edward J. Caldwell. I slid the paper back into the stack so that only the signature line was visible. Then I signed the waiver on top. I put the pen down. The sound of the metal hitting the obsidian table echoed in the room. "Done," I whispered. Brandon looked up. He grinned. A predatory, victorious grin. Finally, he said. He reached over and snatched the papers from me. He did not look at the checkboxes. He did not read the text. He only looked at the signature. He saw my name, and he saw dollar signs. "Perfect," he said, handing the stack to the lawyer. "File it. Wire the funds. We are rich, baby." He turned to Vanessa and kissed her. The room erupted in applause. The bankers were shaking hands. The lawyers were smiling for the first time. I sat there motionless. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It was done. I had just signed the death warrant of my own company. I had just cut the throat of the beast I had spent 40 years feeding. Brandon stood up and buttoned his jacket. He looked at me and his smile faded into a sneer. "Good job, Dad," he said. "You finally did something useful. Now get out of here. The new owners are coming for a walkthrough in an hour, and I do not want you cluttering up the aesthetic." He gestured to the door. "Go home. Wait for your check. And do not spend it all on hard candy." Laughter. Cruel, barking laughter. I stood up slowly. I picked up my velvet bundle. I looked at Brandon one last time. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to scream the truth in his face, but I held it back. The payoff would be sweeter if I waited. I walked to the door. I paused and turned back. "Brandon," I said. "What now?" he groaned, rolling his eyes. "Make sure you read the files," I said. "All of them." Yeah, whatever. Bye, Dad." He turned his back on me. He poured himself a glass of champagne. I walked out of the boardroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, muffling the sound of their celebration. I walked back down the hallway, past the abstract art, past the staring employees. Sarah, the accountant, was still standing there. She looked at me with tears running down her face. "Mr. Caldwell," she whispered as I passed. "I am so sorry." I stopped. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do not be sorry." "Sarah," I said, my voice strong and clear for the first time that day. She looked up, surprised by the change in my tone. "Why?" she asked. Because I said, smiling a small, secret smile. "The show is just beginning, and you are going to want a front row seat." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I felt the weight lifting off my shoulders. I looked at the velvet bundle in my arms. "It is done, Lillian," I whispered. "The trap is set. Now we just wait for the snap." The elevator descended, going down. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was rising. The ride back to West 4th Street felt different this time. The city of Chicago was no longer a towering prison of glass and steel designed to make me feel small. It was a stage, and I had just finished the opening act. I sat in the back of a yellow cab, clutching the velvet bundle tight against my chest. The driver asked if I wanted the radio on, but I shook my head. I needed silence. I needed to hear the echo of the pen scratching across that paper. I needed to remember the look on Brandon's face when he snatched the documents from my hand without reading a single word. That look of arrogance was the fuel I needed for what was coming next. When I arrived at Russo's shop, the closed sign was still up, but the door was unlocked. Russo was waiting for me. He was standing behind the counter polishing a pocket watch with a rhythmic, nervous energy. When he saw me enter, he stopped. He looked at my face, then at the bundle in my arms. "Did you sign it?" he asked. His voice was rough with lack of sleep. I nodded, closing the door behind me and locking the deadbolt. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet shop. I signed it, I said. I signed exactly what he deserved. Russo let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. He came around the counter and led me to the back room. The workspace had changed since I left this morning. The workbench was cleared of all other projects. In the center sat a computer terminal that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was a heavy beige box with a CRT monitor, the kind that hummed with static electricity. Connected to it by a tangle of custom soldered wires was a docking station. It was a cradle, Russo explained, pointing to the device. I had to cannibalize 3 different hard drives to build an interface that could read the raw data from the music box. The connection is analog, but the translation is digital. It is a bridge between 1994 and today. I walked over to the setup. The monitor was glowing with a blinking green cursor against a black background. It looked ominous. It looked like the eye of a sleeping dragon waiting to be woken up. "Is it ready?" I asked, placing the music box on the table next to the cradle. "The mechanism is repaired," Russo said. I milled the new governor fan down to the microgram. The timing should be perfect. But Ed, once we start this process, there is no pause button. The chip inside that cylinder will wake up. It will query the mainframe at Caldwell Tech, and then it will execute the command. I unwrapped the velvet cloth. The music box sat there, dark and heavy. The water damage was still visible on the wood, a permanent scar of my son's betrayal. But the brass mechanism inside shone with a new, dangerous luster. Russo had polished every gear, every spring, until they looked like gold. "Let's do it," I said. Russo sat at the computer. I stood beside him. He typed a command. "Initiate handshake protocol." The screen flashed. A series of numbers cascaded down the monitor faster than the eye could follow. "Connect the key," Russo said. I picked up the music box. There were 2 small ports on the back that I had never noticed before, hidden behind a decorative panel. Russo handed me 2 cables. I plugged them in. The computer beeped. A high-pitched sound. "Device detected. Serial LC-94-alpha. Status critical." The screen turned red. "Warning, tamper detected. System lock imminent. Authentication required." Russo looked at me. "This is it, Ed. The chip knows it was drowned. It is in panic mode. You have to play the song. You have to prove that the hand turning the key is authorized." I reached out. My hand hovered over the small brass key of the music box. My fingers were trembling. This was the lullaby Lillian used to hum to Brandon. This was the song of peace, and I was about to turn it into a siren of war. I gripped the key. The metal was cold. I turned it. 1 click, 2 clicks, 3. I felt the resistance of the mainspring. It was tight. It was ready. I let go. The cylinder began to spin. The new governor fan whirred softly, regulating the speed. The pins on the titanium drum plucked the teeth of the comb. Plink, plink, plink. The melody filled the room. It was soft and haunting. Brahms' lullaby. But it was mechanical, precise, and relentless. As the music played, I watched the screen. The red warning box began to pulse in time with the music. The computer was listening. It was analyzing the tempo, the pitch, the intervals between the notes. It was checking the mathematical signature of the song. Authenticating. The word flashed on the screen. I closed my eyes. I could see Lillian sitting in the rocking chair holding baby Brandon. She looked up at me and smiled. "Protect him, Ed," she had said. "Protect him from himself." The music reached its crescendo. The final note hung in the air, a pure, resonant chime. Access granted. The screen turned green. Russo slumped back in his chair, wiping sweat from his forehead. It worked. The interface is open. We are inside the Phoenix Trust mainframe. He pointed to the menu that appeared. It was simple. Stark. Option 1. Renew lease. 30 years. Option 2. Terminate lease. Russo moved the cursor. He did not click. He looked at me. It is your call, Mr. Chairman. I looked at the options. Renew meant saving the company. It meant Brandon would get his money. He would win. He would continue to believe that people were disposable and that loyalty was a weakness. He would never learn. He would never change. He would spend the rest of his life thinking he was untouchable. Terminate meant destruction. It meant chaos. But it also meant truth. Select option 2. I said. My voice was steady. Russo typed the command. Terminate. The computer paused. It seemed to hesitate as if asking, "Are you sure?" Then a new window popped up. Warning. Termination protocol initiated. Intellectual property recall in progress. Source code deletion scheduled. And then the numbers appeared. Huge blocky numbers in the center of the screen. 72 hours, Russo whispered. It is a grace period. A standard legal requirement for system migration. The system gives a 3-day warning before the data is permanently wiped from the client servers. 72 hours, I repeated. That is exactly enough time, I said. Enough time for what Russo asked. Enough time for the check to clear. Enough time for Brandon to celebrate. Enough time for the new owners to realize they bought a ghost. And enough time for the truth to sink in. The timer began to tick down. 71, 59, 59, 71, 59, 58. It was mesmerizing. Each second was a drop of blood draining from the body of Caldwell Tech. Russo stood up and walked to the back of the shop, giving me a moment of privacy. I stayed by the glowing monitor. The music box had stopped playing. It sat silent again, its job done. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the small photo of Lillian. It was frayed at the edges. She was laughing in the photo, her hair blown back by the wind on the day we tested our first prototype. She looked so full of hope. I placed the photo on top of the music box. I leaned down until my forehead touched the cool wood. I am sorry, Lillian, I whispered. I am so sorry. I know you wanted this to be a shield, not a sword. I know you wanted to build a future for him. I looked at the countdown again. 71, 59, 45. But you did not see him last night. You did not see the ice in his eyes. You did not hear him call your work trash. I failed him, Lillian. I let him grow up thinking the world owed him everything. I let him forget where he came from. I traced the face in the photo with my thumb. I have to break him to fix him, I said. It is the only way. This lesson is going to hurt. It is going to strip him bare. It is going to take away his money, his pride, his name. But maybe, just maybe, when he is standing in the rubble, he will finally find the man he was supposed to be. I kissed the photo. Forgive me, my love. But the teacher is in session, and the final exam has just begun. I stood up. I felt old, but I also felt strong. I walked over to where Russo was waiting. Leave it running, I said. Do not touch it. Do not stop it. Russo nodded solemnly. I will guard it with my life, Ed. I put on my coat. I had nowhere to go but home to my empty house. But I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. The silence was temporary. In 72 hours, the noise would be deafening. I stepped out into the cold Chicago night. The snow had stopped. The air was crisp and clear. I looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, a satellite was receiving a signal from a small watch shop on West 4th Street. Somewhere in a server farm, a command line was executing. The dominoes were falling. And I was the one who pushed the first piece. The walk to the subway station felt like a victory march. I saw people rushing past me, faces buried in their phones, checking emails, checking stock prices. They had no idea that the world they trusted was fragile. They had no idea that a single wooden box could bring down a giant. I sat on the train bench and watched the city flash by. I thought about Brandon popping his champagne right now. I thought about Vanessa planning her shopping spree in Paris. Laugh while you can, I thought. Drink up, because the bill is coming. And it is going to cost you everything. The train rattled on a metallic rhythm that sounded like a larger, louder version of the music box. Click-clack, click-clack. 71 hours left. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, I slept without dreaming. The sleep of the just. The sleep of the executioner. 72 hours. That is how long it takes for a lie to rot from the inside out. I spent those 3 days sitting in my armchair watching the grandfather clock in the hallway tick away the seconds. I did not answer my phone. I did not watch the news. I simply waited. And now, standing in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, I watched the final act of the play unfold. The room was suffocatingly opulent. It was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, a congregation of the city's financial elite gathered to worship at the altar of the deal. The air smelled of expensive lilies and even more expensive ambition. Waiters moved like ghosts through the crowd, offering flutes of vintage champagne, the very same vintage Brandon had used to drown Lillian's music box 3 nights ago. The irony was bitter on my tongue. I stood in the back near the service entrance. I was wearing my old charcoal suit, the one Brandon despised. I had polished my shoes, but they were still scuffed at the toes. I looked like a relic. I looked like a ghost who had wandered into the wrong party. And in a way I was. I was the ghost of Caldwell Tech, passed here to witness the exorcism of its future. The stage was set up like a coronation. A massive screen behind the podium displayed the new logo of the merged company. It was sleek, soulless, and sharp. The name Caldwell was still there, but it was small, overshadowed by the massive block letters of Horizon. The press was there in force. A wall of cameras and tripods lined the back of the room. The flashes went off in a strobe like rhythm, blinding and disorienting. Pop, pop, pop. They were hungry for the image of the young genius selling his birthright for $500 million. They wanted the fairy tale. They had no idea they were filming a tragedy. Then the music swelled, a triumphant orchestral piece that sounded like it belonged in a superhero movie. The double doors opened and Brandon walked in. He looked magnificent. I have to give him that. My son knew how to wear a suit. He walked with a swagger that was half confidence and half arrogance. He waved to the crowd, his smile perfect and practiced. Vanessa walked beside him, clutching his arm like a trophy. She was wearing diamonds that probably cost more than my house. They looked like the perfect couple, the golden children of Chicago. The applause was deafening. It washed over them, a wave of adoration that Brandon drank in like water. He stepped up to the podium, and the room fell silent. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, and for a split second, his eyes scanned the back of the room. He saw me. I saw his smile falter just a fraction. He looked annoyed that I had actually shown up. He looked at me like I was a stain on his perfect evening. He looked away quickly, dismissing me. "Thank you, everyone," Brandon said, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers. "Thank you for being here to witness history." He paused for effect. He was good at this. He was a salesman. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. He could sell a hollow shell of a company to a room full of sharks. 40 years ago, he continued, my father started this company in a garage. It is a nice story. It is a quaint story. He built good machines, honest machines. But the world does not run on honest machines anymore. It runs on vision. It runs on speed. And let's be honest, garages are for mechanics. Skyscrapers are for visionaries. A ripple of polite laughter went through the room. He was mocking me. He was rewriting history to make himself look taller by standing on my back. "We have spent the last 5 years trimming the fat," Brandon said. "We have shed the dead weight of the past. We have moved away from hardware and into the cloud. We have become agile. And today, by joining forces with Horizon, we are not just selling a company. We are launching a rocket." The crowd cheered. They cheered for the buzzwords. They cheered for the promise of profit. I checked my watch. The time was 11:55. The countdown in my head was screaming. 5 minutes. Brandon beckoned to the side of the stage. The CEO of Horizon Group walked out. Mr. Sterling. He was a man who looked like he was made of granite, cold, hard, and unyielding. He shook Brandon's hand. It was the handshake of two predators agreeing to share a kill. They sat down at a long table in the center of the stage. It was draped in white linen. In the center lay the leather-bound contracts. "Mr." Sterling leaned into his microphone. "Brandon," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, "we are excited to welcome the Caldwell infrastructure into our family. But before we sign, I have to ask one final formality. The due diligence team raised a question about the legacy encryption protocols. Can you guarantee here and now that you hold 100% of the intellectual property rights to the source code?" The room went quiet. This was the money question. Brandon did not hesitate. He did not blink. He laughed, a confident, easy laugh. "Mr. Sterling," he said, leaning back in his chair, "my father founded this company. My mother wrote the original code. I am the sole heir to both. The intellectual property is as secure as the gold in Fort Knox. I personally oversaw the transfer of all rights. There are no loose ends." No loose ends. He said it with such conviction. He believed it. He believed that because he had bullied me into signing that paper 3 days ago, he was safe. He forgot that I had checked the wrong box. He forgot that he hadn't read the document. "Excellent," Sterling said. "Then let's make some money." He opened the folder. The crisp white pages lay flat under the bright stage lights. Brandon reached for the pen. It was a gold pen provided by the lawyers. He held it up to the light, admiring it. He looked at Vanessa, who blew him a kiss from the front row. I looked at the clock. 11:58. The timer on the chip inside the music box had exactly 2 minutes left before the grace period ended. But the grace period was just for data recovery. The lease itself? The lease had expired days ago. The moment Brandon put his pen to that paper, he would be committing felony fraud on a massive scale. He uncapped the pen. I took a step forward from the shadows. I didn't mean to. My body moved on its own. I wanted to stop him. For a fleeting second, the father in me wanted to run up there and slap the pen out of his hand and save him from prison. But then I remembered the ice bucket. I remembered the look in his eyes when he called Lillian's work trash. I remembered the nursing home brochure. I stayed where I was. I let my feet sink into the plush carpet. Brandon lowered the pen to the paper. "This is for you, Dad," he said into the microphone, a final insult disguised as a tribute. "Since you are watching from the cheap seats, this is how you really run a business." He pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line. The ink began to flow. The camera shutters clicked furiously, capturing the moment the prodigal son sold his soul. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Goodbye, Brandon." And then the lights went out. Not just the stage lights, the chandeliers, the exit signs. The entire building plunged into darkness. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Then the emergency sirens began to wail. But they weren't fire alarms. They were the server room breach alarms. A low mechanical hum that vibrated in the floorboards. The massive screen behind the stage flickered back to life. But the sleek Horizon logo was gone. In its place was a simple pixelated image. a bird rising from the flames, a phoenix, and underneath it, in bold red letters that were 10 feet tall, the words that would end my son's life as he knew it. System failure. License revoked. Data corruption 100%. The darkness was not just in the room. It was in the network. The kill switch had engaged. I opened my eyes. The only light in the room came from that red warning screen casting a hellish glow over Brandon's face. He was still holding the pen, frozen in terror, staring at the screen. The silence broke. Phones began to ring. Hundreds of phones all at once. The stock alerts. The server notifications. The sound of $1 billion evaporating into thin air. I smiled. The music box had played its final note. Now it was time for the applause. The darkness was absolute. It was not the kind of darkness that happens when a bulb burns out. It was a heavy, suffocating blackness that seemed to suck the air right out of the room. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the collective intake of breath from 300 wealthy guests. The camera flashes stopped. The clinking of crystal glasses stopped. Even the air conditioning units on the roof groaned and died, leaving us in a sudden, stifling silence. Then the emergency lighting kicked in. It was not the warm white light of the chandeliers. It was a harsh, throbbing red. Rotating beacons mounted in the corners of the ceiling began to spin, casting long, terrifying shadows that danced across the walls. The room looked like the inside of a submarine that had just been hit by a torpedo. And then came the sound. It started as a low rumble beneath our feet, a vibration that rattled the silverware on the tables. It grew louder, rising in pitch until it became a digital scream. It was the sound of the server farm in the basement, initiating a hard shutdown. It was the sound of cooling fans spinning in reverse. It was the death rattle of the Caldwell Tech infrastructure. Brandon was still standing at the podium. In the red strobe light, he looked like a demon. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. The golden pen had slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table, stopping at the edge of the abyss. Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Horizon, was the first to move. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "What is going on?" he roared, his voice cracking. "Is this a power outage? Get the backup generators online." But it was not a power outage. The screens told the story. Behind the stage, the massive LED wall, which moments ago had displayed the arrogant new logo of the merged company, flickered. Static washed across the pixels like digital snow. Then the static cleared. An image appeared. It was simple. It was ancient. It was undeniable. A bird made of fire, a phoenix rising from a pile of ash. It was Lillian's symbol, the watermark she put on her private letters, the doodle she drew on napkins, the inlay on the music box. Below the bird, the text scrolled in blocky retro font reminiscent of the terminals from the 90s. System failure. License revoked. Zero Eyes protocol active. The room erupted. It started with the phones. A symphony of notifications. Every investor, every banker, every reporter in that room had their devices linked to the market. And the market was reacting in real time. My phone vibrated in my pocket, but I did not need to look at it. I could see the panic on the faces around me. A young stockbroker near me looked at his screen and screamed. He actually screamed a high-pitched sound of pure terror. "It is gone," he yelled, holding his phone up like a shield. "The code. The source code. It is gone." "What do you mean gone?" Sterling shouted, grabbing the man by the lapels. "I mean deleted," the broker stammered. "The repository is empty. The cloud backup is empty. The mirrors are offline." Sterling turned to Brandon. His face was purple with rage. He looked like he wanted to strangle my son with his bare hands. "You said you owned it," he hissed, spitting the words out. "You said the transfer was secure." I do." Brandon stuttered. He was shaking. He looked at the phoenix on the screen, and I saw the recognition in his eyes. He knew. In that moment, he knew exactly what he had done. He remembered the music box. He remembered the ice. "This is a glitch," Brandon said, his voice trembling. "It is a hack. Someone is hacking us. Security. Call security." But security could not help him. You cannot arrest a dead woman's will. The giant screen changed again. It began to display the stock ticker. It was a live feed from Wall Street. CDWL, $85. CDWL, $60. CDWL, $12.50. The numbers were falling so fast they were blurring. It was a free fall. The algorithm trading bots had detected the loss of the intellectual property and were dumping the stock by the millions. My net worth. Vanessa shrieked. She was looking at her portfolio app. She grabbed Brandon's arm, digging her nails into his expensive suit. "Brandon, do something. We are losing millions every second. Fix it." "I cannot fix it," Brandon yelled, pushing her away. "I do not have the keys." "The keys!" The word hung in the air. The investors began to run. It was a stampede. Men in tuxedos pushing past women in gowns, trying to get to the exits, trying to get a signal, trying to call their brokers to sell before it hit zero. Tables were overturned. The champagne tower crashed to the floor, sending shards of glass and expensive liquid everywhere, mixing with the panic. I stood still. I was the eye of the storm. I watched the chaos with a heavy heart, but a clear conscience. This was not vandalism. This was consequences. On the screen, the phoenix began to flap its wings. It was a simple animation Lillian had coded years ago. And then a progress bar appeared. Data wiping. 98% complete. "Wait," Sterling shouted, pointing at the screen. "Stop the wipe. Pull the plug. Someone go to the server room and pull the physical plug." "It is too late," I whispered to myself. "The chip does not need power from the grid. It runs on its own internal logic." The progress bar hit 99%. Brandon fell to his knees. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken his mother's favorite vase and knew there was no way to glue it back together. He stared at the bird on the screen. "Mom," he whispered. And then the screen went black. Totally black. The phoenix was gone. The warning text was gone. The stock ticker was gone. The only thing left was the red emergency light spinning and spinning. Data wiping, 100% complete. The room fell silent again. But this time it was the silence of a graveyard. The deed was done. Caldwell Tech, as they knew it, was dead. The servers were now just expensive heaters. The hard drives were blank slates. The patents, the algorithms, the user data, it was all magnetic dust. Mr. Sterling walked over to Brandon. He stood over him, casting a long shadow. "You just cost me $200 million, Sterling said. His voice was dangerously calm. "I didn't know," Brandon sobbed. "I swear I didn't know." "You signed the contract," Sterling said. "You claimed ownership. That is fraud, son. That is federal fraud." He turned to his lawyers who were huddled in the corner. "Call the DOJ. Call the SEC. I want his assets frozen before he leaves this building. I want his house. I want his car. I want the shirt off his back." Vanessa heard this. She looked at Brandon kneeling on the floor. She looked at the angry mob of investors circling them. She made a calculation. She took off the diamond ring Brandon had given her. She dropped it into his lap. "I am going to my mother's," she said. "Do not call me." "Vanessa, wait!" Brandon pleaded, reaching for her hand. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "You are broke, Brandon, and you are going to jail." I did not sign up for this. She turned and walked away, her heels crunching on the broken glass of the champagne flutes. Brandon was alone. He sat in the middle of the ruin of his own making. The red light washed over him, making him look like he was burning in hell. I finally moved. I stepped out of the shadows. My old shoes made no sound on the carpet. I walked past the stunned investors who were too busy weeping over their losses to notice the old man in the charcoal suit. I walked up to the stage. I climbed the stairs slowly. My knees hurt, but I didn't care. I stood in front of Brandon. He looked up. His eyes were red and wild. He looked at me, and for a moment he didn't recognize me. Then he saw the suit, the charcoal suit. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, help me." It was a hack. It was the Russians, or the Chinese. They wiped us out. I shook my head slowly. "It wasn't the Russians, Brandon," I said. My voice was amplified by the acoustics of the room even without the microphone. "It was the trash," I said. Brandon blinked. Confusion clouded his face. "The trash," he repeated. "The music box," I said. "The one you threw in the ice." Brandon's eyes widened. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing my lapels. You did this? You old lunatic. You destroyed my company because of a music box." I pushed his hands away. I was stronger than I looked. Or maybe he was just weak from the shock. "I didn't destroy it, Brandon. I took it back. The company belonged to the person who held the key. You threw the key away. I just picked it up." "You are insane," he screamed. "I will have you arrested. I will sue you into the ground." "With what money?" I asked calmly. "Look at the screen, Brandon. Look at your phone. You don't have a legal team anymore. You don't have a company to sue on behalf of. You are just a man in a rented tuxedo standing in a rented room." Sterling stepped forward, looking at me with a mixture of horror and respect. "You are Edward Caldwell," he said. "The founder." "I am," I said, straightening my tie. "You did this?" Sterling asked, pointing at the black screen. "I exercised my right as the owner of the intellectual property to terminate the lease due to violation of the terms," I said, using the legal language Leo had taught me. "The violation was the destruction of the authentication token." Sterling looked at Brandon, then back at me. He let out a short bark of a laugh. "Well, I will be damned." The kid tried to sell a car he didn't have the keys to. He turned to his team. "Pack up. The deal is dead. We are leaving." "Wait," Brandon screamed, running after him. "We can fix this. We can restore from a backup." "There are no backups," I said loud and clear. Lillian made sure of that. "When the phoenix burns, it burns everything. The only way to rebuild is from the ashes. And you, Brandon, you don't know how to build. You only know how to sell." The investors began to turn on Brandon. I saw the anger in their eyes. These were men who had lost fortunes tonight. They wanted blood. I looked at my son one last time. He was surrounded. He was alone. He was terrified. "This is the lesson, Brandon," I said. "You wanted to be a big man. You wanted to play with the sharks. Well, the water is full of blood now. Let's see if you can swim." I turned my back on him. I walked down the stairs. The red lights were still spinning, but to me they looked like celebratory fireworks. As I reached the exit doors, I heard Brandon screaming my name. "Dad! Dad, don't leave me!" I didn't stop. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool, quiet hallway of the hotel. Behind me, the chaos continued, the sound of a world ending. But in front of me, the corridor was empty and peaceful. I took a deep breath. It smelled of floor wax and rain. It smelled of freedom. I reached into my pocket and touched the small brass key of the music box. It was warm. "It is done, Lillian," I whispered. "It is finally done." The silence in the room was heavier than the darkness. The emergency lights continued to spin, painting the faces of the 300 guests in intermittent flashes of blood red. They stood frozen among the overturned chairs and spilled champagne looking like statues in a museum of disasters. All eyes were fixed on the stage where Brandon knelt in the ruin of his ambition. But I was not looking at Brandon. I was looking at the microphone stand that had been abandoned in the panic. I began to move. I stepped out from the shadows of the service entrance. My old charcoal suit was wrinkled, and my shoes were scuffed, but as I walked down the center aisle, I felt a change in the atmosphere. The crowd parted for me. They did not part out of respect, not yet. They parted because they were confused. They saw an old man walking toward the epicenter of a catastrophe, and they did not know what to make of it. I did not shuffle. I did not hunch my shoulders. The weight that had pressed down on me for 5 years, the weight of grief, and the weight of my son's disrespect was gone. In its place was a cold steel rod of purpose. I walked with the stride of the man who had built this tower, not the man who had been allowed to live in its basement. I reached the stairs to the stage. I gripped the railing. It was cold under my hand. I pulled myself up one step at a time. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. Brandon looked up. He was still on his knees, the diamond ring Vanessa had discarded lying next to him like a piece of debris. He squinted at me through the red gloom. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Dad, what are you doing? Go back to your seat. It is not safe up here." I ignored him. I walked past him. I walked past Mr. Sterling, who was frantically shouting into his cell phone trying to stop the bleeding of his own stock price. I walked straight to the podium. The microphone was live. I could hear the low hum of the feedback loop. I reached into the deep pocket of my jacket and pulled out the velvet bundle. I unwrapped it slowly. The movement was deliberate. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to see the wood, the brass, the mother-of-pearl phoenix. I placed the music box on the podium directly under the spotlight of the emergency beacon. I reached for the auxiliary audio cable that had been used earlier for the celebratory video package. It was a standard jack. I plugged it into the hidden port on the back of the music box. A sharp crackle of static echoed through the ballroom, causing several people to cover their ears. Then silence again. I reached out and turned the key. 1, 2, 3. I let go. The sound that came out of the massive concert-quality speakers was not a digital fanfare. It was not a bass-heavy beat. It was a fragile mechanical tinkering. Plink, plink, plink. Brahms' lullaby. It was the sound of a nursery. It was the sound of innocence. But amplified to this magnitude, it sounded ghostly. It sounded like a judgment from the grave. The simple melody filled the cavernous room, bouncing off the walls and the terrified faces of the investors. It was the soundtrack to their financial apocalypse. Brandon scrambled to his feet. He looked at the box, then at me. "Turn it off," he screamed, lunging toward the podium. "You are embarrassing me. Turn that stupid thing off." He reached for the box, but a hand shot out from the side of the stage and grabbed his wrist. "I would not touch that if I were you, son." Brandon froze. He looked at the owner of the hand. It was Leonard Katz. Leo. My old lawyer had emerged from the wings. He was wearing a trench coat over his pajamas, and he looked disheveled, but his eyes were sharp as razors. He held a leather briefcase in his other hand. Leo Brandon stammered. "Leo, thank God. Tell him. Tell my father to stop this. He is having a breakdown. He is ruining the merger." Leo released Brandon's wrist with a look of distaste. He walked over to the microphone standing next to me. He placed his briefcase on the table and snapped the latches open. The sound was loud enough to be heard over the music. "He is not ruining the merger," Leo said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "There never was a merger, Brandon. You cannot merge what you do not own." Brandon laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Of course I own it. I am the CEO. I am the heir." Leo pulled a document from his briefcase. It was yellowed with age, protected by a plastic sleeve. He held it up to the light. "You are the heir to the furniture," Leo said calmly. "You are the heir to the building lease. You are the heir to the bank accounts. But you are not the heir to the mind of Lillian Caldwell." Leo turned to the crowd, addressing the room full of sharks. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Leonard Katz. I am the executor of the Phoenix Trust. 30 years ago, Mrs. Lillian Caldwell, the true architect of the technology you are bidding on today, created a failsafe. She knew that technology evolves, but character is constant. She placed the ownership of the source code, the algorithms, and the encryption keys into a blind trust." Leo pointed to the music box, which was still playing its haunting tune. "That box is not a toy. It is a physical authentication token. It is the only key that validates the license for Caldwell Tech to use the software. The lease for that license expired at midnight." Mr. Sterling stepped forward. He looked pale. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. "But we signed the waiver," Sterling said, holding up the paper Brandon had forced me to sign. The father signed the waiver. He confirmed the status. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was raspy, but it did not waver. "I signed exactly what you put in front of me, Mr. Sterling." Leo picked up the contract from the table where Brandon had left it. He flipped to the signature page. "Read it carefully," Leo said, handing the paper to Sterling. Sterling squinted at the document in the red light. He checked box B. Sterling whispered. He checked the termination box. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. "You terminated the lease. You wiped the servers." I nodded. "I told you," I said, looking straight at Brandon. "I told you to read the documents. I told you to pay attention to the details. But you were too busy counting your money. You were too busy throwing my gift in the trash." Brandon fell back against the table. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "But why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this? You just burned $1 billion. You burned your own legacy." I reached out and touched the spinning cylinder of the music box. "My legacy is not money, Brandon," I said softly. "My legacy was supposed to be you. And somewhere along the way, I failed. I let you believe that value comes from a price tag. I let you believe that you could treat people like dirt and buy your way out of it." The music box played its final note and clicked into silence. The room was deathly quiet. "You threw this box in the ice." I continued, my voice rising. "You called your mother's work garbage. You tried to put me in a home so I wouldn't embarrass you. You thought I was weak because I was kind. You thought I was stupid because I was old." I looked out at the crowd. Well, I am old. I am old enough to know that when a tree is rotten, you do not paint it gold. You chop it down and you plant a new one. Leo stepped forward again, closing his briefcase with a final snap. "The Phoenix Trust has officially revoked all usage rights," Leo announced. "As of this moment, Caldwell Tech is an empty shell. It has 0 assets, 0 intellectual property, and 0 value." He turned to Brandon. "And since you knowingly attempted to sell rights, you did not possess Mr. Caldwell. You are in violation of Title 18 of the United States Code regarding securities fraud and wire fraud." The sirens outside the hotel finally became audible. But they weren't fire engines. They were police cruisers. Blue lights began to mix with the red emergency beacons, creating a kaleidoscope of colors on the walls. Brandon looked at the door. He looked at me. He looked at the empty screen where his empire used to be. "You set me up," he screamed. "You planned this." "I didn't plan for you to be a monster, Brandon," I said. "You did that all by yourself." I just turned on the lights so everyone could see it. I unplugged the music box from the sound system. I wrapped the cord neatly. I picked it up and tucked it back into my pocket. I turned to Mr. Sterling. "I apologize for the inconvenience," I said with a polite nod, "but I believe you have a refund to process." I walked to the edge of the stage. The stairs seemed less steep going down. I saw the police entering the back of the room, pushing through the crowd. I saw them spotting Brandon on the stage. I did not stop to watch. I did not look back. I walked down the aisle through the parted sea of ruined investors and shattered glass. I walked toward the exit, toward the cool night air, toward the rest of my life. I was Ed Caldwell. I was a watchmaker. I was a husband. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I was a father who had done his job. The room was spinning around my son, but I stood in the center of the hurricane with my feet planted firmly on the ground. I gripped the microphone stand not for support, but because I wanted to make sure every single syllable I was about to speak was recorded by the news cameras that were still rolling in the back of the room. The red emergency lights continued to wash over us, bathing Brandon in the color of his own failure. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer the eyes of a CEO. They were the eyes of a frightened boy who had lost his mother in a crowd. "You asked me why Brandon," I said, my voice booming through the speakers that were now powered only by the emergency circuit. "You asked me why I would burn down the house you live in." I pointed a shaking finger at the empty black screen behind us, where the Phoenix logo had just delivered its fatal message. "I did not burn it down," I said. "You did. You lit the match 3 nights ago at your party. You just didn't realize the fuse was 72 hours long." Brandon shook his head, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat on his brow. "I don't understand," he sobbed. "It was just a box. It was just a stupid wooden box." I took a step closer to him. The crowd of investors leaned in. They had stopped screaming about their money. For a moment, captivated by the raw human tragedy unfolding on the stage. "It was never just a box," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "It was a test. And you failed it." I looked out at the audience, addressing the sharks in their ruined tuxedos. "My wife Lillian was the smartest person I ever knew," I told them. "She could write code that would make the government jealous. But she was also a mother. She worried about her son. She worried that growing up with money would make him soft. She worried that growing up with power would make him cruel. So she built a failsafe." I turned back to Brandon. "She put her heart into that mechanism, Brandon. She put her trust in it. She told me that if the day ever came where you proved you were worthy, I was to give you the key. But if you proved that you had lost your way..." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "You called it trash," I said, hitting the word hard. "You held your mother's life's work in your hands, and you called it trash. You threw it in a bucket of ice because it didn't look expensive enough for your penthouse. You said trash belongs with trash." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key. I held it up. It caught the glint of the red strobe light. "Well, you were right, son. Trash does belong with trash, but you were confused about which one of us was the garbage." Brandon collapsed. His legs simply gave out, and he fell sideways onto the stage. He curled into a ball, covering his ears, as if trying to block out the truth. But the truth is not a sound. The truth is a feeling, and it was eating him alive. I looked at the cameras. I looked directly into the lens, knowing that this footage would be played on every financial news channel in the world tomorrow morning. "You want to know the value of Caldwell Tech?" I asked the room. "You want to know what you were buying? You were buying a promise made by a liar. You were buying a shell company run by a man who would sell his own father for a signature." I gestured to the ruin on the stage. "There is your CEO. There is the visionary. He owns nothing. He created nothing. And as of tonight, he is worth nothing. Mr. Sterling, the man who had almost bought the company for $500 million, walked up to the edge of the stage. He looked at Brandon with pure disgust. Then he looked at me. Mr. Caldwell Sterling said, "Is there any way to reverse this? If we renegotiate, if we cut him out completely, can you restore the data?" I looked at Sterling. He was bargaining. He still thought this was a business deal. There is no restore button, I said. The Phoenix protocol is designed to be permanent. The data has been overwritten with zeros 7 times. It is dust, Mr. Sterling. It is ash. But the value, Sterling stammered. The algorithms. The user base. The value was in the integrity of the people running it, I said. And that value reached 0 a long time ago. I looked down at Brandon one last time. He was rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. I saw him reach for his pocket, checking for his phone, but he stopped. He realized there was no one left to call. Vanessa was gone. His lawyers were gone. His friends were gone. I felt a pang of sorrow in my chest. No father wants to see his child destroyed, but sometimes you have to break the bone to reset it properly. You have a choice now, Brandon, I said softly. He looked up. His face was a mask of misery. What choice, he croaked. I have nothing. You have the truth, I said. For the first time in your life, you are starting from 0. No trust fund, no stock options, no safety net. Just you and the consequences of your actions. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. You can stay here on the floor and rot, I said. You can blame me. You can blame the market. You can blame the world. Or you can stand up. You can go to jail. You can serve your time. And when you come out, maybe you can learn how to build something real. I stood up and dusted off the knees of my trousers. But that is up to you. I am done carrying you. I turned away from him. I walked back to the microphone one last time. My name is Edward Caldwell, I said. I am a watchmaker, and this company is closed for business, permanently. I tapped the microphone. It let out a final screech of feedback. Then I unplugged it. The sound of the sirens outside was deafening now. The heavy doors of the ballroom burst open, and a team of federal agents in windbreakers swarmed into the room. They had been called by the SEC monitoring algorithms the moment the stock crashed to 0. I saw them spot Brandon. I saw them moving toward the stage with handcuffs on their belts. I did not stay to watch the arrest. I did not want that image burned into my memory. I wanted to remember Brandon as a boy, not as a felon. I walked down the stairs and into the crowd. The investors parted for me like the Red Sea. They looked at me with fear. They looked at me with awe. They saw an old man in a cheap suit who had just snapped his fingers and erased an empire. One young man, a junior associate, who had laughed at me earlier when I asked for a napkin, stepped into my path. He looked terrified. Mr. Caldwell, he stammered. Sir, can I get you a car? Can I call you a driver? I stopped and looked at him. I smiled a tired, genuine smile. No, thank you, son, I said. I think I will take the subway. I like the noise. It reminds me that the world is still turning. I walked past him and out the double doors. I walked through the lobby of the hotel, past the shocked concierge, and out into the cool night air. It was snowing again. Big, soft flakes that melted on my face. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It tasted like closure. I reached into my pocket and touched the music box. It was silent now. Its job was done. Lillian's job was done. And mine was just beginning. I had a lot of work to do. I had to find a way to forgive myself. And maybe in 10 or 20 years, if he was willing to do the work, I would have to find a way to forgive my son. But for tonight, I was just going to go home. I was going to make a cup of tea, and I was going to sleep in a house that belonged to me free and clear. The rain in Chicago does not wash you clean. It freezes you to the bone. It finds every crack in your armor, and it fills it with ice. I was sitting in my kitchen holding a mug of hot tea that I did not drink. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that usually brought me peace, but tonight it felt heavy. I was waiting. I knew they would come. I knew the timeline of a collapse better than anyone because I had built the structure they were standing on. At 2 in the morning, the sound began. It was not a knock. It was a physical assault on my front door. Fists pounding against the wood. Desperate rhythmic thuds that shook the frame of the old brick house. "Dad! Dad, open up! It is Brandon! Let us in!" I did not move immediately. I sat there listening to the panic in my son's voice. It was a voice I had not heard since he was 6 years old and had woken up from a nightmare. But this was not a dream. This was the reality he had created. I walked down the hallway. I did not turn on the lights. I wanted the darkness to remain. It was my shield. I reached the front door and looked through the peephole. The porch light illuminated a scene of absolute misery. Brandon was standing there, soaking wet. His tuxedo was ruined, the expensive fabric clinging to his skin. His hair was plastered to his forehead. Next to him was Vanessa. She was shivering violently, her arms wrapped around herself. Her mascara had run down her face in black streaks, making her look like a weeping gargoyle. They looked like refugees from a shipwreck. "Dad, please!" Brandon screamed, pounding again. "Open the door! We have nowhere to go!" I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door. I did not unlock it. "Go away, Brandon," I said. My voice was muffled by the door, but I knew they could hear me. "Dad, they took the penthouse," Brandon sobbed. "We got back and the locks were changed. The doorman, Jerry, the doorman who I tipped every Christmas, he wouldn't even look at me. He said the property was seized by the federal marshals. He kicked the door in frustration. They froze my cards. Dad, I tried to check into a hotel and my black card was declined. Do you hear me? Declined. We have no cash. We have no car. We walked here in the rain for 3 miles. I closed my eyes. 3 miles in Italian leather shoes that were never meant to touch dirty pavement. It must have felt like a death march. "You have friends, Brandon," I said through the door. "Go to them. Go to the people you drank champagne with. They won't answer." Brandon yelled, his voice cracking. "I called everyone. Harrison, Chen, Martinez. None of them will pick up. They blocked me, Dad. As soon as the news hit, they blocked me." "Imagine that," I said softly. "It turns out when you have nothing to offer, the parasites find a new host." Vanessa stepped forward, pushing Brandon aside. She slammed her hand against the door. "Ed, open this damn door right now!" she shrieked. "This is elder abuse! I will sue you! I am freezing to death out here!" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You are going to sue me, Vanessa? With what lawyer?" The retainer checks just bounced. "And as for abuse, you are standing on the porch of a man you tried to put in a memory care unit yesterday. You said I needed supervision. Well, I am supervising my property right now, and you are trespassing." "Ed, please." Vanessa's tone shifted instantly from aggression to begging. It was a whip splash of manipulation. "I am sorry, okay? I am sorry about the party. I am sorry about the comments. Just let us in for one night. Just one night. We can sleep on the floor." I looked at the deadbolt. It would be so easy to turn it. It would be so easy to be the father who fixes everything. To bring them in, give them towels, make them soup. But if I did that, I would be robbing them of the only valuable thing they had left. The lesson. "I cannot do that," I said. "Why?" Brandon screamed. "Why are you doing this to us? We are family." "Family," I repeated, tasting the word. "Family is the people who respect you, not the people who wait for you to die so they can sell your house. You told me 3 days ago that you wanted to cut the dead weight. You told me you wanted to fly." I paused, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. "Well, fly, Brandon. You are free. You have no company to run, no parents to burden you. You are completely independent. This is what you wanted." Dad. I am scared, Brandon whispered. His forehead was resting against the door on the other side. We were just inches apart, but we were in different worlds. I am scared, and I am cold. I know, son, I said, tears finally spilling from my eyes in the dark hallway. I know you are, and you need to feel that fear. You need to let it soak into you like that rain, because that fear is the only thing that is going to make you a man. If I open this door, I am just an ATM again. I am just a safety net. And you are too old for safety nets. But where do we go? Brandon asked. Go to the police station, I said. Turn yourself in. It is warm in there. They will give you a dry blanket. And they will give you a lawyer who has to talk to you by law. You want me to go to jail? I want you to take responsibility, I said. Facing the consequences is the first step to earning back your name. There was a silence on the porch. Then I heard Vanessa crying, a low, angry sobbing. He is crazy, Brandon, she spat. He is a senile, old, vindictive psychopath. Let's go. We will break a window at my sister's house. I listened as their footsteps retreated down the wooden stairs of the porch. Step by heavy step. I waited until I heard the gate latch click shut. I walked into the living room and pulled back the curtain just an inch. I watched them walking down the street under the orange glow of the streetlights. They were walking apart, not holding hands, not comforting each other. Just two wet, miserable figures trudging into the darkness. I let the curtain fall back into place. My heart was breaking. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run after them, but I stayed put. I went back to the kitchen and poured the cold tea down the sink. I washed the mug and placed it in the drying rack. You threw the box in the ice, Brandon, I whispered to the empty room. Now you have to live in the cold. I turned off the kitchen light. I did not go to sleep immediately. I sat in the dark, listening to the rain, and praying that the storm would wash away the boy so that the man could eventually return. But tonight, the door stayed closed, and that was the hardest thing I had ever done. The silence that followed their departure was short-lived. I had barely finished washing my tea mug when the living room was bathed in a sudden, chaotic rhythm of blue and red light. It cut through the curtains and danced across the ceiling like a fever dream. I did not need to look out the window to know what it was. In a neighborhood like this, flashing lights only meant one thing. The bill had come due. I walked back to the front window. I moved the curtain just enough to see the street. The rain was still coming down in sheets, a relentless downpour that blurred the world outside. But through the gray curtain of water, I saw them. 3 police cruisers were parked at erratic angles, their light bars spinning. They had cut off the end of the block. They had found him. Brandon had not made it far. He was standing on the sidewalk under the harsh glow of a street lamp about 50 yards from my driveway. He was soaked through his expensive tuxedo, clinging to his frame like a second skin. He looked like a man who had been shipwrecked. He was shouting something at the officers, his arms flailing in wide, desperate gestures. I could not hear his words through the double-paned glass, but I could read his body language. He was trying to explain. He was trying to negotiate. He was trying to use the charm that had worked in boardrooms for 10 years. But the police do not care about charm. They do not care about stock options or mergers or penthouse addresses. They care about warrants. I saw 2 officers approach him. They moved with a practiced caution, their hands resting near their belts. One of them said something sharp and authoritative. Brandon froze. He stopped waving his arms. He looked around wildly, looking for an exit, looking for an ally. He looked back toward my house. I took a step back into the shadows. I could not let him see me. If he saw me, he would think there was still hope. He would think that his father was watching over him, ready to swoop in and make the bad men go away. And that was the one delusion I had to shatter. Tonight, there was no father. There was only a witness. The officer spun Brandon around. It was not gentle. It was efficient. I saw Brandon flinch as his face was pressed against the wet metal of the police car. His cheek, the same cheek Vanessa had kissed just hours ago, was now flattened against the cold steel of the law. Then came the movement that breaks every parent's heart. The officer reached for his belt and pulled out the handcuffs. Even from this distance, I could see the glint of the silver. Click, one wrist. Brandon struggled. I saw his shoulders heave. He was crying out now. I imagined he was screaming about his rights, about how this was a mistake, about how he was a CEO. Click. The second wrist. It was done. The chain was locked. In that second, Brandon ceased to be the master of the universe. He became a number, a suspect, a defendant. The transition was brutal and absolute. Mr. Sterling had not wasted time. The charges for securities fraud and wire fraud must have been filed the moment the server wiped itself. Selling a non-existent asset for hundreds of millions of dollars is not a misunderstanding. It is a crime. And tonight my son was paying the deposit on his sentence. The officers guided him toward the back seat of the cruiser. He stumbled, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the wet pavement. He looked so small. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. As they pushed his head down to protect it from the doorframe, he looked up one last time. He looked straight at my window. I do not know if he saw me. The house was dark, but I felt his gaze. It was a mixture of hatred and terror. He was realizing that the safety net was gone. He was realizing that he was falling, and the bottom was a concrete floor in a holding cell. I placed my hand on the glass. The pain was cold. "I am not saving you, Brandon," I whispered to the empty room. "I am saving the man you might become." The officer slammed the car door shut. It was a final, definitive sound. The cruiser pulled away, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The other cars followed in a procession of red and blue. Within seconds, the street was empty again. The lights were gone. The sirens faded into the distance. All that was left was the rain and the orange glow of the street lamp, illuminating the spot where my son had lost his freedom. I let the curtain fall back into place. My hand was trembling. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, a physical reaction to the trauma of watching my own flesh and blood being taken away in chains. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. But I did neither. I took a deep breath. I walked to the fireplace and picked up the poker. I stirred the dying embers of the fire, watching the sparks rise up the chimney. They were gone. Vanessa was gone to find her next victim. Brandon was gone to find his conscience. And I was here. I was alone. But for the first time in years, I was not lonely. I was just tired. The kind of tired that comes after a long day of hard, honest work. I turned off the last lamp in the living room. "Good night, son," I said into the darkness. "I hope you find what you are looking for, because you won't find it in a bank account anymore." I walked up the stairs to my bedroom. The music box sat on my dresser, its brass key shining in the moonlight. I did not wind it. It did not need to play tonight. The silence was music enough. It has been 30 days since the lights went out at the Ritz-Carlton. 30 days since the phoenix rose from the ashes and burned down a kingdom built on lies. The silence in my life has returned, but it is no longer the heavy silence of an empty house. It is the peaceful silence of a job well done. I am sitting in the back room of Russo's watch shop. The air smells of Earl Grey tea and gun oil. It is a strange combination, but to me it smells like home. Across the workbench, Leo is trying to fix an old cuckoo clock and failing miserably. Russo is yelling at him in Italian, waving a screwdriver like a conductor's baton. "You are treating the gears like they are lawyers," Leo Russo shouts. "You cannot sue the clock into working. You have to listen to it." I sip my tea and laugh. It feels good to laugh. It feels light. Leo puts down the clock and picks up a stack of papers. "You know, Ed," he says, his voice turning serious. "The offers are still coming in. There are venture capitalists who want to rebuild Caldwell Tech. They say if you come back as CEO, they can raise the stock price in a week. You could be a billionaire again." I look at the papers. I look at the numbers. They are just ink on a page. "Burn them," I say. Leo smiles. He knew I would say that. "We are not rebuilding the empire," I tell them. "I spoke to the trustees this morning. We are releasing the source code. All of it. The medical encryption algorithms, the data security protocols, everything Lillian wrote. We are making it open source. Any hospital, any research center, any university can use it for free." "But the money?" Russo asks, raising an eyebrow. "The money from the liquidation of the remaining physical assets will go to the orphanage downtown," I say, "and a scholarship fund for engineering students who can't afford tuition." I look at my two friends, two old men who stood by me when my own blood turned against me. "I am done being a CEO," I say. "I am retired. I have a garden to tend to. And I have a lot of clocks to fix." Leo nods and puts the papers in the shredder. The sound of the machine eating the potential billions is the sweetest music I have heard all day. And Brandon, Leo asks gently, "Have you heard from him?" I look out the window at the dusty street. "He is awaiting trial," I say. "The federal prosecutors are not lenient. He is looking at 5 to 10 years. I pause, taking a breath. He writes to me. Every day. He sends letters from the detention center. At first they were angry. Then they were desperate. But the last one was different. He asked about the garden. He asked if the oak tree was still standing. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He just asked about the tree. I haven't answered him yet. Not yet. He needs time to sit with himself. He needs to understand that the tree is standing because its roots are deep, not because it is covered in gold. But I keep the letters. I keep them in a drawer next to my bed. Maybe one day, when he is ready, I will write back. I stand up and walk over to the shelf in the corner of the shop. It is the place of honor where Russo keeps his most prized creations. I pick up the music box. It is fully restored now. Russo and I spent the last week working on it. We sanded down the water damage. We revarnished the wood until it glowed with a deep, warm luster. We replaced the bent governor fan. I run my thumb over the mother-of-pearl phoenix on the lid. It feels cool and smooth. This box used to be a weapon, I say softly. It used to be a kill switch. But now, I wind the key. 1, 2, 3. I open the lid. The music plays. Plink, 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 Brahms' lullaby. It is no longer a countdown. It is just a song. A song about love. A song about protection. A song about a mother's hope for her son. I place the box back on the shelf next to a photo of Lillian. In the photo, she is smiling that mysterious smile of hers, as if she knew all along that it would end this way. As if she knew that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. I look at Russo and Leo. "Who wants more tea?" I ask. "I do," Russo says, "but only if you fix this cuckoo clock. It is driving me crazy." I pick up the screwdriver. I sit down at the bench. I adjust the light. My name is Edward Caldwell. I am 70 years old. I don't have a company. I don't have a fortune. But I have my dignity. I have my friends. And I have the truth. I am a watchmaker. And for the first time in a long time, my own time belongs to me. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you never have to make the choice I made, but if you do, I hope you have the courage to choose what is right over what is easy. Trash belongs with trash, my son said. He was wrong. Truth belongs with truth. And now, if you will excuse me, I have a clock to fix. If you believe that arrogance always pays a price, hit that like button and comment deserved down below to join me as we continue this journey of justice in the next story.